Yeah. All right. So both and. So last week we ended with the farewell prayer and this idea of the radical I love this author, this description from an author, the radical indwelling of God in believers, that this is the sort of points us to the future vision that Jesus is talking about. And the farewell address, we breezed through it, but there is some repetition and themes, which I think adds just to this, the emphasis of abiding and what does it all mean? But just as a context of where we're headed next, we are headed to the arrest and the trial. And you will see as we work through 18 that the commentator I was working with divided this narrative into scenes. And I kind of like that idea. So if you see at the top of my slide where it says scene 1, I'm borrowing that from my friend Gail O'Day here, because there is some, you could almost envision this as a play, and it's probably text that we're already quite familiar with. So let us read the arrest part. I think I've got 2 slides. So we're in John 18 verses 1 through 12. And is there anyone who'd like to read the first slide?
I'll start.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, John Hales, and then Nancy, you can read the second one. How's that?
Perfect.
Nancy, do you want to start?
No, go, please go.
After Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground.
Again, he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered them, "I told you that I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. I do not drink the cup am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" So the soldiers, their officers, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him.
So there's a lot happening in these first 12 verses, and much of it is also in the other Gospels. But there are some details that are, either missing or changed. Like we don't know, the Garden of Gethsemane is not named in this, for example. That's just one of those details. And the other is that this is still before the Passover, and that might explain the large number of sort of police and religious authorities that would have been present. And then we also have, as we've been reading John, we've been noticing the I am, right? And this revelation of God. And commentators often suggest you should leave out the he and just say I am. But so here is this revelation of God in a rather unexpected and unusual way. So with that, I'm going to say what stands out to you today. What would you like to discuss about these first 12 verses?
One difference I noticed on the next page was some of the other Gospels talk about Jesus healing the ear, and that's omitted here. I was also curious on the first page that you had, verses 1 to 12, that the police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, that the religious leaders are also the enforcers of the law. That's so foreign to us in this country, to think about that.
Well,
I suppose that you would call ancient Palestine a theocracy to a certain extent. I mean, the government was the appointee from Caesar, and then you had a king, but the Pharisees, I think they ran the courts, so there was some aspect of theocracy involved. And since the law was not a civil law, but a law handed down by Moses, and with all the details that you see in Deuteronomy and some of the other old books, I think it fits. And yes, they don't have separation of church and state in that sense.
I think another point, maybe we're going to come to this, and I could be wrong, but I always heard that one of the reasons that the chief priests weren't satisfied to do the trial of Jesus themselves is they weren't allowed to impose a death penalty. Only Pilate or Romans were. So there was some distinction in the law of minor crimes. So that's probably doing stuff on the Sabbath or breaking any of the 600 rules. That could all be litigated by their police and court. But when you got to something like a death,
good point. That's a good point, Diane, because I agree with you that you're right. They could not impose a death penalty on a citizen. Only the Romans could do that. And I like Tim's also observation that it's sort of like the Romans are the federal government and Palestine has its own government. In other words, they leave the Palestinians to run their affairs as long as they obey the bigger picture, So they enforce.
Pilate was not in Jerusalem full time. This is what I've read, that he traveled back and forth from, was it Caesarea, or I forget, on the coast, and he came to Jerusalem just in time for this trial, and also it was just a really kind of tenuous time. Pilate's trying to keep things in order, and it's a very unruly time. And not long later, there's a civil war and Jerusalem's overthrown and the temple goes down, and so he's trying to throw it back at the chief priests, and that's what we're going to read. He and they throw it back at him. It's the judgment of Jesus. So it's kind of like a boiling pot that he's trying to keep in control.
Yeah,
and also, go ahead.
Yeah, Herb, that's a good observation. And of course, I go back to the very beginning when Pilate made the grievous error of when he took over the whatever his post was called. He marched into Jerusalem flying the banners. His soldiers were flying the banners of Caesar, and that just infuriated the Sadducees and the Pharisees because, and they went and complained to him and said, "We're going to report you back to the emperor." Well, that just scared the bejesus out of Pilate. You don't want to get in trouble with the emperor because then he might fire you, put somebody else there. So anyway, this has been going on for years. And so from that point on, in my opinion, Pilate was always compromised. I mean, the Jewish rulers sort of had him where they wanted it. Threats to expose him to the emperor as a bad administrator, especially if there's unrest and revolt.
There's another thought that the authors of the Gospels played down the role of the Romans and essentially tried to make the Romans look pretty good because of the power that the Romans had. And so Pilate actually looks pretty good because on several occasions, I mean, we've jumped now ahead, but on several occasions, he says, "I find nothing wrong with this man. I find him to be innocent." And then in response to the crowd, he has Jesus flogged. And then basically he's asking, is that enough? So he's trying to keep the peace. And he seems as though he appreciates the innocence of Jesus, whereas the Jewish leaders don't.
But there are times where he mocks Jesus. I mean, I'm getting us ahead of ourselves, but
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's all how you read it, I guess.
He could have been made to look much worse, though.
Mhm.
But that's an interesting point, though, that if this was written in 70 AD or 80 AD or somewhere around then, that area would have still been under Roman rule. Am I correct in my history there? So you
Sure.
probably had to be careful politically about what you were writing about, even about history.
But I think the Christian community, much of it had fled Jerusalem,
Right.
and I think they had gone north.
Right.
But I'm not a historian.
Right.
But
And we're
they
not
were still within the Roman Empire, though, because the Roman Empire goes all the way around the Mediterranean.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah,
we don't
I
know
sort of-
exactly where the gospel according to John originated, perhaps Ephesus, but yeah.
Also,
but
I think the mocking was done to provoke Jesus to defend himself. Again, jumping away, Pilate says, shall I crucify your king? And then it says, finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So Pilate is portrayed as a reluctant participant. The reality might very well have been that Pilate was told that Jesus was a troublemaker and was stirring up the Jews, and Pilate wanted to keep things peaceful for political and economic reasons. And so Pilate just said, okay, crucify him.
Right. So yeah, so we'll I want to make sure we get to the trial. But I don't want to lose sight of some of the backdrop that's being set up here. And I think there are a lot of contrasts. You see both religious and state authorities, and then you see something interesting that was pointed out was this idea that, Jesus isn't hiding. He goes out to them and he says, who are you looking for? And when there is, there's this heavy police presence and, Peter chops off the ear, but Jesus, there's this contrast of the violent state and Jesus is like, no, that's not the way. So there's, before the trial happens, which is rich, and we will get there are these contrasts. And I think they're contrasts and questions which can still inform us today, right? What is the relationship between, this religion and state, and what happens in society, and how that relates to our faith? And one of the questions that a commentator from Feasting on the Gospels wrote was, why is the revelation of God, so we have this I am he, this theophany here, why is the revelation of God often met with violence? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a question that could be a whole other study, but just didn't want to lose sight of sort of the backdrop of this arrest narrative. So now, and then we are coming up to the interrogation. So Tim, would you like to read, this is on this slide, I have chapter 18, verses 13 through 18.
First, they took him to Annas. Is that how you pronounce that? Annas?
I don't
Annas.
know.
I think it's
yeah.
Annas.
Annas. Yeah, I think that's better. First, they took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter was standing outside the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, you are not also one of this man's disciples, are you? He said, I am not. Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself.
Thank you. Let's read this full interrogation. Diane, would you read, this is 19 through 24.
Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said. When he had said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus on the face, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered, If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
I'll read these last few verses here. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They asked him, You are not also one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, Did I not see you in the garden with him? Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, the cock crowed. So again, we have this is what some commentators have called the unofficial trial. And interestingly, I read that Annas had been the high priest, and that was recorded in history for a few years, but he wasn't evidently at this moment in time. So he's the son-in-law of the current high priest. And there's also a lot of contrast happening here where Jesus answers boldly, I am he, I'm not talking in secret. Peter gets asked this question, are you one of the disciples? And Peter says, I am not. So there's those kind of contrasts as well. But I'm sure you all have things that you want to talk about too. So I love that this is a discussion more than a lecture. So thank you all.
One thing that caught my attention, at least what I always heard growing up, was this cryptic reference to disciple. Another disciple is about John. So I'm going to go with that for a minute, that this is talking about the other disciple is John. And twice, John goes out of his way to say he knew the high priest. And I am trying to get my history of John correct. I would think this is like knowing a bigwig, and it seems a bit surprising for me for a young boy. John, was he a fisherman? Was he one of the sons of Zebedee? I mean, so I think it's kind of interesting that he knew the high priest, or the high priest knew him.
Right. And as you mentioned, so he knows the high priest and went with him into the courtyard. I didn't think about this till I read it in the commentary, but because it's before Passover, you had to be clean, and so you couldn't go into a Gentile's house. So this is why they're in the courtyard and not entering in, as I understand it. Maybe others have read other things. But yeah, what do you all make of this other disciple knowing the high priest?
Well, I think, we have to remind ourselves that this is Delaware. This is a very small area of human beings, and they've lived together for generations. So my assumption is that you have the North Shore group, you have the South Side Irish, and they intermix in commerce and, socially. And, so I wouldn't be a bit surprised that John, who was the youngest apostle, he's probably about 24 or 25 when he joined them. I think he came from a rather well-to-do family, and so they would know these people, and they probably knew him when he was a toddler, type of thing. So that's my take on it.
Well, he could very well have been in the working class and have done some sort of manual labor for Annas or his son-in-law.
So So we're in Jerusalem now, but I'm thinking of these guys growing up in Galilee, or the northern part of Israel, which it is a small, it's a tiny country, but when the only mode of transportation is your foot or a donkey, they're not neighborhoods either.
Diane, I think that's a good point, and I find the business about John knowing Caiaphas and Annas to be, just to be not credible. To me, that's a kind of a glaring point that, maybe it was a literary device to show that something, it reflects on Peter's more subordinate role, that he can't come in by himself.
Well, I must disagree with Tim's. I'll stand by my my interpretation that these families in some way knew each other, and John was was a known person.
But as Diane points out, they were Galileans.
Yeah, but they all
and this
came
is
down to Jerusalem for Passover. So it's a big social event. It's the cotillion. It's the benefit.
Well, the verse says he was known to the high priest. It doesn't say he knew the high priest.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying they were buddies. I'm just saying he was known.
Right.
Yeah. And so
And
there
what-
are different, there are different possible interpretations. And then, what can we use to inform that? We have the text here, which is, if we stick with this, it's limited. We can start to bring in, history and knowledge of the area. And, is there any other historical record? But this one may be a little bit of a mystery. I don't know.
and why would a woman be the one who would guard the gate?
That caught my eye too.
Right. Yeah. And I happened to find this. Is this the Rembrandt one? Yes. Sorry. I have one screen kind of behind the other here. So if I duck out, it's so I can see my own words. But so this is another Rembrandt painting. And here you have the woman and Peter denying it. I don't know. It's interesting. There are actually several images from art about Peter's denial. I found another one here.
I was just going to add one just kind of
Sure.
interesting thing I noticed on that previous text, and that is Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and that is sort of a mirror image of Jesus 3 times identifying himself. I am he, I am he, I am he. Peter denies him 3 times, so it's just interesting, I think.
Right. I am not.
Peter, who was maybe the greatest disciple.
Right. So here's this very human person, right? And who ends up being the cornerstone of the church, even though he gets a really bad rap right now. He's slicing off ears and denying he even knows Jesus. So it's definitely a story of redemption in the end. But right now he's not looking so good. So I wonder, I know that there was a lot of talk about the trial. So should we go ahead and move on to the trial? Does that work for everyone? All right. So this is what the commentator called scene 1. So here we go. We're entering, we're moving, right? We're going from Caiaphas's house to Pilate's headquarters. And Herb, would you read verses 28 through 32?
Yeah. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die.
And I'm going to go back and correct myself. This is where they could have entered Caiaphas's place probably, but because he was a religious leader, but it's Pilate's place that they can't. So I misspoke earlier. So many courtyards, so many characters. So here again, we have this intersection of, state and religion. That tension continues, and you begin to wonder: is this going to be a fair trial, right? Or is this going to be more about power? Because it's like, well, you try it. No, you try it. Well, we can't try him. There's this whole thing kind of happening behind the scenes, and the actual issue at hand seems to be secondary to the political happenings. I don't know what other people would like to lift up.
I'm interested that in verse 30, they didn't immediately say sedition is the accusation we bring against this man. They, danced around, take our word for it. He's committed a crime or we wouldn't have brought him.
Right.
Maybe they were still getting their act together on what the accusation was going to be, but it seemed like it would have caught this Roman office, officials' attention right away if they had said he's been suggesting the overthrow of Caesar or something like that. They did not start with that.
I think Diane makes a good point, and I would expand on it and say that they were not very persuasive because they were more concerned, I believe, about the blasphemy of I am than they were sedition, because really there is no sedition here. And saying that Jesus was promoting sedition would be the best argument to make to Pilate, as Diane is suggesting, but they didn't do that.
Right. Yeah. So his identity is a threat both to the religious authorities because it's blasphemy, and the political authorities because of Caesar. So
I don't think Pilate cared whether Jesus said I am and the Son of God and all of that. I don't think Pilate cared at all about that. Sedition, that would bother him.
And the religious authorities have already tried to stone him for blasphemy, right? But that hasn't worked. So I wonder how that plays into this part of the narrative. Go ahead, John.
Well, I suppose we're going to get to the fact that Pilate eventually says, I find no fault in this man, and they get upset and start yelling and screaming, and then he makes this deal with the Barabbas. Which do you want? And you know what happened. We all know what happened. So I don't think Pilate felt he was guilty, but Pilate was spineless. He was so terrified that there'd be an uprising and it would get back to his boss.
Yeah. And there's this little parenthetical comment just here too about the kind of death he was going to die, right? Crucifixion. So some have read this as there's this double meaning, right? That of being lifted up, he's going to be glorified and crucified. So this parenthetical may be referring to that, right? That he needs to be crucified because that's to fulfill.
Yeah, I think only the Romans could crucify. I do think the Jews could stone people to death because they were trying to do that earlier. So it's a little confusing when in verse, let's see, where is it? 31, it says, we are not permitted to put anyone to death. I don't think that's correct. I think they could stone somebody to death within their own laws, but they couldn't crucify. That was strictly up to the Romans, and since the leaders wanted crucifixion, they had to get the Romans involved. So I find this a little puzzling that they say we are not permitted to put anyone to death.
Could be a translation thing. Maybe that was a comment. Maybe it doesn't mean anything to us, but put anyone could mean only crucified to someone who was in the know back in those days.
Yeah, that could be.
Well, you remember the incident where Jesus stepped in. Otherwise, that woman taken in adultery would have been stoned to death.
Right. Yeah. So it is a little bit of a curious way that it's phrased.
But that's a religious law. See, that's a religious law that one who commits adultery, pays the price.
Right.
But blasphemy would also could result in death, but they wanted a more cruel death than stoning.
Right.
Well, let's think about another thing. There still were common people that followed Jesus. So that part of the thing might be we don't want a public stoning because they might turn around and stone us. So having the Romans decree that he should be treated as a criminal and hung on a cross, that's has finality to it.
It's certainly a complicated situation of how this transpired, and sort of the motivations behind it. You get that idea that there's tension, right? There's a reason they're pushing, but they may not be very persuasive, and it's politics, it's religion, it's all a little bit of a mess. So let's keep going to get through the trial here. So scene 2, as Gail O'Day calls it, "Are you the King of the Jews?" John Hales, would you read verses 33 through 38?
Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" And Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew. Am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my fellow followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are king?" And Jesus answered, "You say that I'm king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate asked him, "What is truth?"
One of the great questions asked in the Bible.
Right? What is truth?
Well, to me, it's obvious. I mean, of course, we know the story that Jesus was here to give us spiritual sustenance and not material things. So, but back then, I mean, this was the crux of the matter. The Sanhedrin and the Pharisees were saying he's claiming to be God. That's blasphemy. And he's also saying he's king, and that's against Caesar. So, it's that. Put him in a box.
Right. And so here we have this question, "Are you the King of the Jews?" which is the question also posed in the other Gospels. But Jesus doesn't really answer it. He talks about his kingdom, which sort of implies kingship, but he's sort of altering our understanding of what a king and a kingdom are. So he's not really answering directly, but he's talking about my kingdom, what his kingdom is like.
I think that Pilate understood that Jesus was not claiming to be an earthly king, because in the next paragraph, it says, after he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him."
Yeah, that's my point. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's
He's
read
about
the
to
last
change
few
what
verses.
the definition of a king is.
Right. Nancy, would you read the last few verses, 38b through 40 of 18, because we're there anyway, so we might as well. Scene 3. So he's moving again.
After he said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" They shouted in reply, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a bandit.
Commentaries say that Barabbas was not really a bandit. He was actually part of a sedition. And the NIV in the same verse says, now Barabbas had taken part in a rebellion. And I think commentators would say the NIV translation is more accurate than the New Revised Standard.
Tim, in your commentary, I read something about how the word bandit is the same, that it echoes the word used in John 10, that about the sheepfold. I am the sheepfold, but the gate, whoever goes to the gate but climbs it in by another way is a thief and a bandit. So there's this echo that, you know, Jesus is the way. And did you run across that?
I vaguely remember that, but I can't put my finger on it to add to what you've said. You know, you said that your commentary talks about 7 scenes. The New Interpreter's Bible also talks about 7 scenes. And the 1-volume New Interpreter's commentary, which is written by different people,
Right.
also has 7 scenes. So it seems like we have at least 3 commentators all saying the same thing. Frequently they disagree, but the
Right.
7 scenes structure seems to be pretty well accepted.
Yeah. We're going to have to do a little research into this word bandit and what where that comes from.
I wanted to return once more to this king question. And Pilate never asks him, are you a king? He asks him, are you the king of the Jews? And he tells the people, you can have a choice of do you want the king of the Jews or Barabbas? And Jesus is clear that he is not the king of the Jews. And to me, there's a bigger principle under this, that he is king and the kingdom is for the whole world. It is not just of the Jews. So I feel like it's not a semantics difference to talk about his kingdom and him being a king, but he wasn't the king of the Jews. Because he wasn't the Messiah, you know, of what they were looking for.
If I might add, Diane, I think you're right on. But I also think Pilate was trying to mock the Jews by saying this. He claims he's king of the Jews, and that was anathema to the Jews, of course. And Pilate, you know, he's in a position like, well, and then then they go and they put a crown on his head of thorns, and I think on the cross they put up a sign in 3 languages saying "King of the Jews." Further just to rub their nose in it, you know. So.
Right. And echoes of that mockery. You have a custom that I release someone for you is a little bit mocking as well, right? When Pilate comes out.
Well, the irony is it was meant to mock him, but it could not have been higher praise.
Exactly. And also, I always think about that with Caiaphas too, saying, is it not better for one man to die that the whole nation can live? There was more truth in that statement than he realized either about the meaning of
Yeah, you know, we tend to, at least I do in this day and age, I think of God as a parent, as my heavenly Father. Jesus always referred to his Father, our Father, his Father. So I think initially he tried to sell this new spiritual kingdom as a family of God, you know, and we're all his children. But the Jewish nation, you know, the Jews were trained to think of the Messiah, that a king was coming. And I think he just lost that battle. He could not use his imagery. He had to go with the kingdom imagery because that's what they understood.
Right. Well, and yeah, I think that's interesting, is that this revelation of who he is tripping everyone up, right? This is, are you Jesus of Nazareth? He says, I am, right? So definitely his identity and God's revelation is unexpected, and it is causing a great deal of confusion. And now it's causing a great deal of unrest in this trial. And we are going to leave it here as a cliffhanger. So like your favorite TV show, we will pick it up next week with John 19. This was a rich discussion about a fairly familiar text. So thank you all.
Thank you, Christine.
As a follow-up on the bandit,
Oh, sure.
the Oxford Study Bible says bandit, parenthesis, or revolutionary insurrectionist. So it could be that the Greek word can be used for both. This doesn't say that about the Greek word, but I just wanted to point out that the study Bible is not letting the reader think bandit as in thief, because they're putting in this parenthetical comment. So
Thank you.
maybe that'll be our homework for next time.
Sounds good. I would look forward to that, pulling out some of my commentaries. So, well, take care, everyone. Be well. We'll meet here again online next week.
Bye, everyone.
Great
Have a
discussion.
good week, everybody.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks. You too. Take care. Bye.
Bye, you guys.